My name is Yusuf. I am 60 years old, a widower for 7, and until this morning, still clinging to the belief that my son respected me, if not loved me. I live in the house of my son, Alec. Or rather, in the house I helped Alec buy years ago, back when I still thought of my savings as our money. After my wife, Aisha, died, I stayed in our old apartment for a while. The silence there was heavy. Every object felt like a memory I couldn't put down. Alec had been renting a cramped place in the city back then, barely covering the bills on his sales job. When he found this 2-story with the little garden in front, he came to me like a man desperate for air. "Baba," he said, "the bank will give me the mortgage if I can just raise the down payment. This is our chance to have a proper family home. Timon will have his own room. You can come live with us." I didn't hesitate. I sold some investments, added a chunk of my pension savings, and handed it over. We signed the papers in his name. It was simpler, we told ourselves, and I moved into the guest room. It was supposed to be temporary. But months blurred into years, and it became normal. In the beginning, I convinced myself it was a blessing. I'd help raise my grandson, they'd have me for company, and we'd share meals like a real family. The truth was slower to reveal itself. My place in the house was as a fixture, useful only when I was paying for something. This morning began like most others. I woke before dawn, prayed, and sat by the window watching the first-week light creep over the rooftops. In the kitchen, the smell of coffee drifted out, a rich, dark aroma that used to mean comfort. When I stepped in, my grandson Timon was already at the table, elbows splayed wide, phone next to his plate like an extra piece of cutlery. He didn't greet me, just looked up with the impatient expression of someone who had been waiting to speak. "Grandpa," he said, "I need $6,000. I stopped in my tracks. "6,000? For what?" "A gaming computer. High-end. All my friends have them." I smiled faintly. "Your current computer works fine." "It's not about working," he replied, already annoyed. "This one can handle all the new games in 4K. My friends have it. I'm falling behind." "Falling behind in what?" He frowned. "Mom told me you've got extra money. She said you're just sitting on it, and I could ask you." My jaw tightened. His mother had been planting seeds again. "Your mother is mistaken. I'm not giving you $6,000 for a toy." "It's not a toy," he snapped. "You don't understand anything about gaming." "Maybe not," I said, "but I understand money. And you'll have to earn something like that yourself." Timon shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the tile. "So you're just going to be selfish?" Before I could reply, Alec came in, yawning, hair a mess, wearing only an undershirt. "What's this?" Timon jumped at the chance. "I asked Grandpa for money for a gaming PC. He said no." Alec's gaze settled on me, steady, expectant. "You could help him out. It's for his future. Computers are important." "Then buy it for him yourself," I said. A flicker crossed his face, something sharp. He picked up the mug of coffee from the counter. It was still steaming. I didn't think he would actually do it. But he tilted it in one quick motion, and the scalding liquid splashed down my shirt. The heat bit into my skin. I drew a sharp breath, but didn't cry out. "Give me money," Alex said, his voice suddenly raised, "or get away. I'm done with you acting like a miser in my house." For a moment, I saw him not as my son, but as a stranger wearing his face. The boy I had raised alone after his mother's death, the young man whose debts I'd covered more than once, this was who he'd become. I didn't answer. I went in my room, shut the door, and began packing my bag. No dramatic slamming, no shouting. I folded my shirts, tucked my prayer beads into a side pocket, and zipped the suitcase closed. 15 minutes later, I walked out without a word. Neither Alec nor Timon stopped me. The motel I found was a squat building beside the highway. The man at the front desk didn't ask questions. I paid cash and took the key to room 14. Inside, the carpet smelled faintly of old smoke, and the humming air conditioner fought a losing battle with the stale air. I sat on the bed, my bag at my feet, staring at the peeling wallpaper. In the next room, a television played some talk show. The laughter on it sounded distant, artificial. It was here, in that cheap, anonymous room, that the truth settled on me like dust. I was not a father to Alec anymore. I was not even a man to him. I was only a wallet. And a wallet, once emptied, is thrown away. I looked down at the coffee stain drying across my shirt, a brown, irregular batch of truth, and I touched it lightly, feeling the faint sting on my skin. I would not be thrown away. If they thought they could burn me and send me quietly into the shadows, they had forgotten something. I have lived 6 decades, seen hunger and war, built my life from nothing. I know how to survive. And now I would decide how to act. I left the motel at first light with the ugly coffee stain still ghosting my shirt. The air was sharp and clean the way mornings get after a night of highway rain, and my plan was simple: get to Kareem's shop and ask to borrow his back office and his brain. Kareem and I had prayed shoulder to shoulder for 25 years. He'd buried a wife before me, survived a bad business partner, and come out the other side careful, not bitter. He would know what to do. The bus stop sat in the shadow of a faded billboard. I reached into my jacket for my wallet to check bus fare and felt only lining, smooth and traitorous under my fingers. I patted my other pockets. Nothing. I checked the overnight bag, emptying shirts and a bottle of aspirin onto the bench like a nervous street magician. No wallet. A cold, dry feeling opened in my chest. Maybe I'd left it at the motel on the nightstand. I jogged back, old man jogging, more a hurry than a run, let myself into room 14 and scanned every surface. Under the bed, in the bathroom, in the tiny empty fridge. Gone. I told myself not to panic, that I could still get to Kareem without it. The bus took cards. I could tap my bank app. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app, ready to breathe again. Your password has been changed. For security, please verify with the code sent to your phone number ending in 13. 13 was not my number. It was Alex. I backed out and tried the credit union. Same message. New phone on file. New recovery email. My fingers hovered above the glass, as if the right combination of taps could will me back into my own life. I tried the debit card I'd memorized, entered the numbers manually, asked to add it to the wallet on my phone. This card is no longer available. I stood very still in that cheap room and listened to the air conditioner rattle like loose change. I pictured my wallet sitting on the kitchen counter at Alex's house the night before, where I dropped it after buying Timon's favorite cereal, a small habit of mine that no one noticed. In the chaos after the coffee, I hadn't picked it up. Alec had. Accident? No. It clicked into place with the cold little logic of a trap. The missing wallet. The changed passwords. The way my name had quietly slipped off bills over the last 2 years, replaced with Alex. The way he'd insisted on simplifying things for me, the paperwork slid under my elbow after dinner, the guiding hand on my pen. Look, Baba, we'll make it easy for you. You've done enough. Let me carry it from here. I saw it all at once, bright and cruel, how I'd traded control for peace and called it love. I remembered the first time, the online banking. It's too many passwords for you, Alec had said, kind, almost apologetic. Let me set up one login for both accounts. I'll link your checking to mine, that way I can pay the utilities without bothering you. I had been tired that day, the stares angry in my knees. Of course, I said. He set the recovery number to his phone for security because mine kept failing the text codes. Then the car. The insurance company had raised my premium after a minor fender bender. We'll register it in my name, he'd offered. It'll drop the rate, and it's all family anyway. I didn't like the sound of it, but he had done the research, had the printouts, the numbers. Just sign here, Baba. I kept the keys, so it still felt like mine. Paper, I told myself, can be fixed later. Mail was next. Let's go paperless, he urged. Safer than leaving statements in the mailbox. I'll manage the emails. He created a new shared address with his name first, Alakandiosov at something, and began migrating everything to it. After 6 months, I barely got anything with my name on it. When I asked why, he smiled, because I'm taking care of it for you. Even my phone plan had shifted to his family plan to save money. Each small surrender made sense by itself. Together, they formed a neat circle with me in the middle, unarmed. Back on the sidewalk with my bag, I tried the ATM outside the motel office, hoping for the mercy of cash. I keyed in the numbers from memory and waited for the comforting clatter. The screen blinked. Transaction unavailable. Please contact your bank. The card that lived in my head had been turned to a prop in a stranger's trick. I took the bus anyway. The driver saw the overnight bag and the deep lines in my face and waved me in without a word. I sat at the back and watched the city grind awake, trucks flashing their orange hazard lights, bakery doors yawning open, a boy with a skateboard chasing his own reflection in shop glass. I thought of Timon's flat demand 6,000 and of the way Alex's voice had risen, the word miser launched like a stone. Perhaps the plan had been waiting for the first hard no to justify itself. Kareem's shop sat behind the mosque in a narrow lane that smelled like brake dust and cardamom. When I walked in, he was bent over a transmission, hands black with work. He looked up, saw me, and in one glance took in the dried stain, the bare pocket where a wallet should have been, the way I was holding my breath without realizing it. Yusuf, he said, softly, like a doctor who has recognized an old wound, come sit. I told him everything. Not just the coffee and the missing wallet and the locked accounts, but the slow slide that preceded it, the signatures I'd fired off without reading, the passwords I'd surrendered, the way my name had gotten lighter and lighter until it was paper thin. He didn't interrupt, only asked once, "Do you have your ID?" I shook my head. He wiped his hands and went into the small office that doubled as his refuge and accountant's den. "You stay with me for a few days," he said. "The back room, there's a cot. It isn't a hotel, but it's safe. We put this right." "How?" My voice sounded older than I felt. "One piece at a time." He ticked them off on his fingers. "First, cash. I will lend you what you need today. Second, identity. We go to DMV and replace your ID. Third, think. We go in person, no phone robots, and you ask for the branch manager. You explain the compromised access and demand your accounts be frozen to any online changes until you are present. Fourth, credit. We put a freeze at the bureaus so no one opens anything in your name. Fifth, mail. We file a hold and then a forward to my shop until you decide where you want it. Sixth, phone. New SIM, new number. No more family plan. It won't be that easy, I said, hearing Alex's arguments in my head like an echo. It's all family. I'm just helping. Why do you make it so difficult, Baba? Kareem smiled without warmth. Easy? No. Possible? Yes. And we will speak with the legal aid clinic about revoking any powers you may have signed by accident. We won't guess. We will read. I rubbed my thumb over the ridge of my palm where a burn had raised a thin welt. He planned this, I said. It wasn't an accusation anymore. It was a map I could finally see. The wallet, the accounts, the car, the mail. He pulled every string at once. Kareem folded his arms. Then you cut them one by one. He handed me a small stack of bills. Food, taxis, whatever you need before we fix the cards. No pride now. Pride is for people who are safe. I took the money, surprised by the heat that rose behind my eyes. I had been so careful not to need anyone after Aisha died, so stubborn in my quiet. I thought dependence was the danger. I had not understood that trust without verification can be a trap. In the tiny washroom, I cleaned the stain from my shirt as best I could and looked at my face in the mirror, a stranger and a friend. Lines, yes, but also a steadiness I hadn't seen in a long time, a kind of narrow, useful anger. When I came back, Kareem had a notepad open. Names, he said. Every account, every utility, every subscription you remember. We make a list. We don't chase smoke. We go system by system. We worked until the call to noon prayer drifted through the lane. Bank names. Last 4 digits I could recall. The credit union where Aisha and I had opened our first savings account. The insurer that had moved my car into Alex's name. The online mail portal. The phone carrier. The mosque charity account I'd noticed was smaller than it should be but hadn't questioned because questioning your son feels like accusing him. A thought cut me clean. What else has he taken under the word help? I wrote safe deposit and underlined it hard. You will need a witness, Kareem said, as if reading me. For any conversations with him later. Not today. Today we stabilize. But later, we do not meet alone. I nodded. Through the open door, I could see his mechanics moving around a lifted car, the choreography of competence. The world outside my house still ran on tools and steps and hands that knew what to do. For the first time since the coffee burned my skin, I felt something warm that wasn't pain. Not hope, not yet, but readiness, the kind that hums in the bones when a man who has been walking backward finally turns. "I'm ready," I said. Kareem tore the page from the pad and folded it into my palm. "Then we start." When Farid turned down the quiet, tree-lined street, I assumed we were cutting through to the main road. It wasn't until he slowed in front of a 2-story brick building draped in ivy that I realized this was our destination. "This is it," he said, parking beside a flower bed bursting with marigolds and petunias. I eyed the place suspiciously. The words home for the elderly always conjured images of cold hallways, fluorescent lighting, and the faint smell of disinfectant. This place looked nothing like that. It reminded me of the guest house Aisha and I had stayed in during our honeymoon in Bursa, small, tidy, and warm in a way that made you want to linger. A white bench sat under a maple tree in the front garden, its leaves swaying lazily in the breeze. Someone had placed a folded blanket on one end, as if expecting an occupant to return any moment. "Farid," I said slowly, "are you sure this is get out of the car?" He interrupted with a grin. "You're going to like it. And don't start complaining before you've even seen the inside." Inside, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh bread. A woman at the reception desk, wearing a soft blue cardigan, smiled as if she'd been waiting for me specifically. "Mr. Yusuf? Welcome. We've prepared a room for you." Her tone was polite, but more than that, it was gentle. Not the brittle, customer service politeness you get at banks or government offices, but the kind of courtesy that makes you feel human again. The hallways were painted a warm cream color, lined with framed photographs of local landscapes. I passed a lounge where 2 men played chess and a woman sat knitting, humming softly to herself. My room was at the far end, overlooking the garden. It wasn't large, but it felt like it belonged to me the moment I stepped in. A single bed with a neat quilt, a small wooden desk by the window, a bookshelf already stocked with novels, and curtains patterned in blue and white that reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen. On the windowsill sat a potted plant, a healthy green fern, as if someone had known I'd want something living there. "No rent, no bills, no one shouting at you for money," Farid said, watching my face. "Here, people knock before they come in." I ran a hand over the desk, the smooth surface cool under my palm. It had been years since I'd had a space that felt entirely mine, without an unspoken obligation attached to it. Later that afternoon, I sat by the window with a cup of tea the staff had brought up. The steam curled lazily into the air, and for the first time in months, I realized I wasn't bracing myself for the sound of footsteps outside my door. No one here was about to burst in to demand a favor, a signature, or a loan. The only sounds were a few birds outside and the faint clink of chess pieces from the lounge down the hall. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, Farid was back. He had a strange expression, part satisfaction, part grimness. "I checked," he said, lowering his voice as he closed the door. "Your accounts have been active. Very active. Alec has been moving large sums out, straight into another account. Same surname." I stared at him. So it wasn't just bad luck that I couldn't get into my accounts. "He's been planning this." Farid nodded. "This didn't happen overnight. He's been setting the stage for a while, taking control of your cards, your car, even your mail. Piece by piece, so you wouldn't notice until it was too late." I thought back to every little concession I'd made, each one so reasonable in the moment. Giving him online banking access for convenience. Registering the car in his name to save on insurance. Letting him set up a shared email for efficiency. Now I saw those moments for what they were, not kindness, not efficiency, but the building of a cage. I gripped the arm of my chair. I've been letting him tighten the net around me. And I smiled while he did it. Farid pulled a chair closer. "You trusted him. That's not a crime. But what he's done, that is." I exhaled slowly. The sting of betrayal was still raw, but beneath it something else was forming, something sharper, steadier. "I'm not going to let him get away with this," I said. Farid's mouth twitched into the beginnings of a smile. "Good. Because I know a lawyer who's made a career out of dealing with family members who think they can take advantage of the old and the vulnerable. She's sharp, Yusuf. The kind of sharp that makes thieves wish they'd picked someone else. I looked around the small, quiet room, my room now. For years, I'd been living under constant pressure, measuring every word, every reaction, to avoid setting off Alec's temper. Here, for the first time in a long while, I could think clearly. And the clearer I thought, the more certain I became. I'll fight, I said. I'll take back what's mine. Farid stood, satisfied. Then tomorrow we start. And for the first time since the morning Alec threw coffee at me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: relief, yes, but also a deep, unshakable readiness. This time, I would not be anyone's wallet. The kitchen here always feels like the safest room in the building. Wide windows, sunlight pouring across polished counters, the smell of bread cooling somewhere out of sight. No shouting, no tension. Just the steady tick of the clock and the occasional scrape of a chair as someone sits down for tea. Farid had claimed the largest table in the far corner. He'd covered it with a plain white cloth, his way of telling me that what we were about to do was serious, not just a chat. He set his bag on the table, unzipped it, and began pulling out folders, envelopes, and rubber-banded stacks of papers. These, he said, patting the growing pile, are copies I've been keeping for years. Every bill, every statement you've ever handed me to look over. You're lucky I'm the sort of man who never throws anything away. Digital records can be erased or rewritten. Paper doesn't lie. I sat down slowly, my palms flat on the cloth. It felt almost like preparing for prayer, clearing the space, breathing steady. Farid slid the first stack toward me. Household bills. Look closely. At first glance, they seemed normal. Same utility names, same format. But when I traced the dates and amounts from year to year, my stomach tightened. The numbers had jumped, sometimes doubled, sometimes tripled. See this one. Farid tapped a line item. That company isn't a utility provider at all. It's a private account in another name, disguised with a lookalike company title. I checked. That's how he's been moving money straight out of your account without raising suspicion. He set down another pile, credit card statements in my name. The paper was thick and slightly curled at the edges, as if it had been handled often. I scanned the charges and felt something hot crawl at my throat. Luxury hotel stays in Istanbul. Jewelry shops I'd never stepped into. Designer clothing brands I'd never worn. Gourmet restaurants with bills in the hundreds. All of these, I asked, my voice low. Every single one in the last 2 years, Farid confirmed. And not one matches your spending patterns before. I pressed my fingers to my temple, remembering the careful way I'd lived after Aisha died, modest meals, the same winter coat for 5 years, quiet weekends at home. Meanwhile, my name had been paying for champagne and silk. Farid reached into his bag again and pulled out a single document in a clear plastic sleeve. And this, he said, sliding it across the table, might be your biggest weapon. It was the title to the house. My house. The embossed seal was still sharp under my fingers. My name stood alone on the deed, no co-owner, no transfer filed. I stared at it. It's still mine, I murmured. Exactly. He's been using it like his own, but legally, you're the sole owner. That gives you leverage. The relief I felt was strange, more like an ache loosening than a sudden lift. And with it came a memory so vivid it made my hands clench. I saw myself at the kitchen table 2 years ago, signing the first bank form Alec had pushed toward me. He'd spoken softly, almost apologetically. It's just to help you, Baba. Too many passwords, too many accounts. It's not worth the stress. I'll handle the bills. Then came the car. If we register it in my name, the insurance will drop. Then the mail. Let's go paperless, I'll get the emails. 1 key at a time, I'd handed him access. And I'd done it willingly, because I wanted to believe he was taking care of me. That's what children do for their parents, isn't it? Farid tapped the last folder. Between the inflated bills, the luxury spending, and the property documents, we have enough to act. Here's the plan. He laid it out methodically, like a general mapping a campaign. Step 1. File a police report immediately. Create a formal record of suspected financial exploitation. Once that's on file, it's harder for him to twist the story. Step 2. Begin a civil lawsuit to reclaim any funds taken without authorization. Step 3. Go to the bank in person, no phone calls, no online access, and freeze all accounts until new cards, PINs, and login credentials are in place. Step 4. Notify all 3 credit bureaus and place a fraud alert so nothing new can be opened in my name. Step 5. Redirect all mail here or to Farad's address until the situation is secure. Step 6. Change my phone number and move it off the family plan permanently. I looked at the evidence spread out between us, the years of my life in paper form. Every page was a piece of trust betrayed. I'll see this through, I said finally. My voice was calm, but there was a weight to it I hadn't heard in myself for a long time. All the way to the end. Farad nodded once, a soldier acknowledging another. Then we start tomorrow morning. And Yusuf, once we start, we don't stop. We keep going until he learns the one thing he's forgotten. What's that? That you're still his father. But you're no man's fool. I gathered the nearest pile and began stacking it neatly. The paper felt heavier than it should, but maybe that was because it wasn't just paper anymore. It was proof. It was the first weapon I'd picked up in years. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could win. The lawyer's office smelled of polished wood, old paper, and fresh coffee, the good kind, the kind that lingered warm in the air. Sunlight streamed in through half-drawn blinds, turning the dust motes into slow-moving sparks. Ms. Rashida sat behind a dark oak desk stacked neatly with folders, her posture straight, her hands precise in their movements. She looked like someone who had heard every excuse and dismantled each one without raising her voice. Farad sat beside me, our pile of evidence spread out on the desk. Rashida had gone through each page, reading silently, making tidy notes in a narrow black notebook. Every so often she'd glance over the rim of her glasses at me, as if to check I was following. When she finished the last document, she closed her notebook and leaned back. "You have a strong case, Yusuf," she said. "Your son's actions are textbook financial exploitation. The accounts were in your name, the withdrawals have no justification, and the house is legally yours." She tapped the deed with her pen. "That gives you leverage most people in your position don't have." She opened a fresh folder and slid a set of documents toward me. "We're going to make your assets untouchable. I'm establishing a trust in your name, with me as legal administrator until the matter is resolved. This means no one, not your son, not a bank, not even a distant relative, can sell, mortgage, or transfer anything without your personal signature in my presence. It also protects you if he tries to claim you're unfit to manage your affairs." The pen felt heavier than it should in my hand. My signature had been a tool for surrender in recent years, signed here, Baba, just to make things easier. Now, each stroke was a reclamation. By the time I put the pen down, I felt as if I'd placed bricks back into a wall that had been stripped bare. We spent the next hour reviewing accounts. Rashida had me call the bank on speakerphone so she could guide my words, instructing them to freeze online access, cancel all linked cards, and require in-person ID verification for any changes. When the call ended, she made copies of every piece of identification I had left. The next morning, she filed the eviction notice. Official, stamped, and delivered, Alec would have to leave my house. My house. The words settled in my mind like a stone dropped into deep water. By the afternoon, my phone lit up. First one call, then another, then a flood of messages. The tone shifted with each attempt. "Baba, what's going on? This has to be a mistake. Then, you can't do this to me. You're ruining everything I've built. Then, please, just let's talk. We can fix this." I didn't answer a single one. Rashida had been clear. From this moment, all communication goes through me. It was strange at first, holding the phone in my hand and not responding, but it was also liberating. His words could no longer reach me directly. I'd thought I might feel guilt or fear. Instead, I felt something like still water, calm, deep, unshaken. Life at the boarding house began to take on a rhythm. Mornings started with tea in the garden, the maple tree overhead scattering its leaves like quiet applause. Some days I walked to the corner bakery with Hassan, who was quick with jokes and quicker with his backgammon pieces, which he moved suspiciously fast whenever I wasn't looking. In the afternoons, Miriam and I sat in the lounge with the newspaper between us, passing it back and forth as we worked on the crossword. She had a habit of circling clues she thought I should get, muttering, "Too easy for me," with a sly smile when I did. There was a small library down the hall, lined with mismatched bookshelves, where I found a copy of the Quran with a handwritten dedication inside for those seeking strength. I read it some evenings, not as a duty, but as a reminder that endurance can be quiet, not loud. Every evening, I returned to my room and locked my most important papers in the desk drawer. Knowing they were safe, really safe, was its own kind of peace. The storm outside my door was still raging, but here, inside, the air was clear. And I realized, with something almost like relief, that I was not afraid anymore. This was far from over, and I intended to see it all the way through. The call from the front desk came just after the midday meal. "Mr. Yusuf," the receptionist's voice was polite but edged with caution, "there's a man here asking to see you. He says he's your son." I didn't need her to say the name. "Alec." "Yes," she confirmed. "Do you want me to send him in?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "No visitors from him. You have my written instructions." "Understood," she said. The line went quiet, but through the open lounge windows I heard the front gate's latch rattle. From my chair by the curtain, I had a clear view of the courtyard. There he was, Alec, pacing like a caged animal, phone in hand, his other hand gesturing sharply with every word. Even from here I could read his frustration in the tightness of his jaw, the restless shifting of his weight. Every few minutes he approached the reception desk, speaking quickly, his movements clipped and impatient. The staff on duty remained calm, their faces impassive. I saw the receptionist point to the clipboard on the counter, the one with the list of residents who had restricted visitors. My name was there, printed clearly, next to the words "No contact authorized." From where I stood, it was almost like watching a scene from someone else's life. The voice I couldn't hear but knew by heart, the same voice that had once commanded my attention, bent my decisions, made me swallow my own needs. Now it bounced against the glass door and dissolved into nothing. He tried again. Leaning on the counter, waving his phone as though to prove his right to be let in. The staff didn't budge. I could see him getting louder, his hands slicing through the air. But the young woman behind the desk simply repeated her refusal and shook her head. Finally, he stepped back, scanning the building's upper floors. And then his eyes found mine. For a moment, time folded in on itself. His lips moved, forming a single word, "Baba." The sound didn't reach me, but the memory did, sharp and clear. I was back in our old apartment, a younger man in work clothes smelling of oil and dust. I had just come home from a long shift at the factory. My back ached, my hands were stiff, and I'd been rehearsing in my head how I would tell Aisha that overtime might be cut. But before I could take off my shoes, a small boy with messy hair came running down the hallway, his bare feet slapping against the floor. "Baba," he cried, flinging himself into my arms. His laughter was warm against my neck, his small hands gripping my collar as if I'd been gone for years instead of hours. In that moment, every ache in my body vanished. The day's worries disappeared. Baba wasn't just my title, it was my purpose, my proof that I mattered. Back then, I had thought it would always mean the same thing. Now, watching him from behind the safety of the window, I saw that word land differently. It was no longer a greeting, it was a plea. I didn't move. The staff didn't open the door. He stood there for a long moment, phone limp in his hand, the fight draining out of his shoulders. Then he looked away, shoved the phone into his pocket, and turned toward the gate. His steps were slower now, almost reluctant, as though he had just begun to understand what no contact truly meant. He was leaving with nothing. I didn't feel triumph, not the noisy, chest-beating kind. What I felt was deeper, quieter. It was the solidity of knowing the door would not open again unless I chose it. The power in that silence was stronger than any argument, any shouted demand. I sat back in my chair, the hum of the boarding house around me, distant voices in the corridor, the faint clink of teacups from the kitchen, the creak of the maple tree branches outside. This was my life now, my choice. And though the word Baba would always be tied to love in my heart, I finally understood that love and control were not the same thing. He had lost his hold over me forever. The call from Rashida came early, just as I was finishing my morning tea. "It's done," she said without preamble. "The house is sold. The trust executed the sale entirely. Your signature was handled through power of attorney, and the proceeds are secure in the trust account. No need for you to appear, no contact with buyers, no exposure to your son." I stared at the steam curling from my cup. For a moment, I expected a pang of nostalgia, a pull to see it one last time. But there was nothing. The house had stopped being mine long before the deed confirmed otherwise. It was just a shell now, a place where my name had been used, but my presence had been unwanted. I didn't need to walk through its rooms again to say goodbye. I'd done that the day I closed the motel door behind me and stepped into my own silence. 2 days later, Rashida arrived at the boarding house with a woman in a navy suit. "Yusuf, this is Donna," she said. "She's a specialist in financial abuse investigations. She's been auditing everything we've collected." Donna's handshake was firm, her eyes sharp and assessing. She set a thick folder on the kitchen table, so heavy it made the wood creak. Without wasting time, she began spreading out pages, spreadsheets, bank statements, annotated timelines, even highlighted screenshots of online orders. "This," she said, tapping the top sheet, "is the full documented scope. 87 separate instances of fraud over the last 3 years. Total loss, $137,482. That figure is conservative. We've only included transactions we can directly prove in court." Her fingers danced over the pages as she pointed out categories. Luxury hotel stays billed as business travel. Jewelry purchases labeled as home repairs. Inflated utility bills funneled into a shell account. Cash withdrawals just under reporting limits. Classic structuring. I scanned the columns, each line a date, an amount a lie. Some of them I remembered vaguely, occasions when Alec had said, "Don't worry, Baba, I'll handle the bill." Others were complete strangers to me, expenses for cities I hadn't set foot in since my 20s. "The pattern is deliberate," Donna continued. "It's not impulse spending. He built a system to drain your accounts while keeping you calm and unaware. That actually helps us legally. It shows premeditation." Rashida, who had been silent until then, leaned forward. "We're moving on both fronts. Criminal charges for fraud and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Civil proceedings to recover assets and damages. These will run in parallel. The criminal case establishes wrongdoing, which strengthens the civil suit. The civil suit pressures for settlement, which can speed the criminal outcome. We're not waiting for one to finish before starting the other." Donna added, "Once the criminal complaint is filed, law enforcement will have access to subpoena bank and credit card records beyond what we've already collected. If there's more hidden spending, it will come to light." I sat back, letting the weight of the information settle. On paper, the betrayal was colder but cleaner. Dates, numbers, transactions. Seeing it written down stripped it of its emotional fog. It wasn't a vague ache anymore, it was evidence. And evidence could be fought. Rashida started gathering the papers, but I stopped her. "There's one more thing I want to settle now. My will." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "She will not inherit," I said, my voice steady. "Not a single dollar. When my time comes, whatever remains will go to charity or to those who have stood beside me. But not to her." Rashida nodded slowly. "We'll draft the amendments today. It will be irrevocable unless you choose otherwise." For a brief moment, I thought I might feel guilt. Instead, I felt only clarity, like a lens clicking into focus. This wasn't revenge. It was protection, protection for what I had left, protection for myself, even protection for the memory of the man I had been before this all began. The house sale was just a transaction. The lawsuits were just the framework. The real victory was already here, in this small kitchen, with my life finally under my control again. For the first time in years, I felt untouchable, and I intended to stay that way. The request came through the receptionist mid-afternoon, just as I was reading in the lounge. "Mr. Yusuf," she said softly, "your grandson is here. Timon. He's asking to see you." For a moment, I felt an old ache, memories of him as a small boy, laughing as he tried to ride his first bicycle, falling into my arms when he scraped his knee. But the ache was quickly joined by caution. Timon wasn't Alec, but he was his father's son. If I saw him here, in the safety of the boarding house, it would feel too much like letting that world back inside. "I'll meet him," I said, "but not here. Tell him to meet me at the cafe on the corner." It was a small place I liked, 3 outdoor tables, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery next door, and a bell over the door that jingled with each customer. I arrived first, ordered a black coffee, and took the seat near the window. The light outside was pale, the kind of winter sun that couldn't quite warm the air. When Timon walked in, his hood was pulled low, his hands buried in the pockets of his jacket. He spotted me immediately, but didn't smile. He slid into the chair opposite me, the bells still ringing faintly behind him. "Hi, Baba," he said. His voice had the same hesitant note I remembered from when he was younger and had done something wrong. "It's good to see you, Timon," I said. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Dad says you've been dramatic, that you overreacted, that you locked him out of the house without even giving him a chance to explain." I kept my face still. "He says you attacked him, that you threw things, that you've been confused, forgetful. He says you're not yourself anymore." I knew the words weren't Timon's. They were Alec's, carefully chosen, polished smooth, and handed down like family truth. Hearing them in my grandson's voice was worse than hearing them from anyone else. My son hadn't just stolen my money. He'd stolen my story, reshaped it, and passed it on until, in Timon's eyes, I wasn't a man wronged, but a man to be pitied or feared. "Is that what you think?" I asked quietly. He shifted in his seat. "I don't know what to think. You've always been solid. But Dad says things changed after Mom died. That you've been holding grudges, making things up." And if I'm honest, he trailed off, looking away. I reached into my coat and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared. Heavy sealed, my name written across it in my own hand. I slid it across the table. "Inside is the truth," I said. "Bank records, statements, evidence. Read it when you're ready. I'm not asking you to believe me now, but someday I hope you will look at the facts for yourself." He didn't touch it right away. "Dad says you've been angry at him for years." "Your father has been angry at me for years," I said evenly. "Angry that I didn't give him everything he wanted the moment he wanted it. But anger doesn't give him the right to take what isn't his. Timon, I love you. I always will. But I will no longer be anyone's wallet. Not his. Not yours." His jaw tightened. "It's not about money. It's always been about money," I interrupted gently. "That's the part your father leaves out when he tells the story." For a while, neither of us spoke. The waitress refilled my coffee, and the smell rose between us, warm but doing nothing to soften the cold air at the table. Outside, a couple passed by, laughing, their breath clouding in the air. The sound seemed to come from another world. Finally, Timon reached out, took the envelope, and slipped it into his jacket. "I should go," he said, standing. "I hope you read it," I replied. He nodded, eyes on the floor. "Goodbye, Baba." I watched him leave, the cafe bell giving its small, bright ring as the door closed behind him. The street swallowed him quickly, the hood of his jacket blending into the crowd. I stayed at the table until my coffee was cold. The distance between us had just grown wider, maybe permanently. Our conversation had ended with no warmth, no reconciliation, only the quiet chill of truth left on the table. And yet I felt no regret. Some doors, once closed, are not meant to be opened again. It was just after breakfast when the receptionist knocked gently on my door. "Mr. Yusuf," she said, leaning in slightly, "there are 2 visitors here to see you. They say they're from the police and the Elder Protection Service." I set down my tea and followed her to the lounge. By the window, 2 figures stood waiting. The man wore a gray suit that looked slightly too warm for the season, a leather notebook in one hand. The woman beside him had a navy jacket with the emblem of the Elder Protection Service stitched above her heart. They both smiled as I approached. "Mr. Yusuf," the man said, extending his hand. "Detective Kamal." "And I'm Sarah Malik," the woman added warmly. "I handle community outreach and case coordination for Elder Protection." We sat at the small table near the fireplace, the detective placing his notebook in front of him, flipping to a page marked with a neat paperclip. "I wanted to come personally," Kamal began, "to confirm the results of our investigation into your son's activities. The fraud committed against you is significant, but we found it's not isolated. There are at least 4 other individuals who have experienced similar patterns of financial loss connected to him. Some are elderly relatives, some are people he met through business. In total, we're looking at a much larger scheme than we first realized." Sarah leaned forward, her voice softer. "Because you came forward when you did, and because you insisted on documenting everything, we were able to connect details that might otherwise have been overlooked. You've given us a starting point. In cases like this, silence is common. Victims are ashamed or afraid or convinced no one will believe them. Your willingness to act has already encouraged 2 of the others to speak up." I felt the words land in a place I hadn't examined before. For months, my fight had been about reclaiming what was mine, my house, my money, my dignity. I hadn't thought beyond that. But now I could see a thread stretching outward from my own story into the lives of others who had been trapped in the same quiet submission. Kamal slid a folder across the table. Inside was a printed report, my name appearing on the first page under the heading Primary Complainant. The summary listed the fraudulent transactions, my statements, and a timeline of legal actions taken since. "This report," he said, "is the backbone of both the criminal and civil cases. Your testimony, if you choose to give it, will carry weight in court, not just for your situation, but for the others as well. Without your records, we'd have half the evidence we do now." I traced a finger along the edge of the paper, feeling the slight roughness where the pages had been stapled. "So this isn't just about me anymore." "It already isn't," Sarah said. "You've shown that it's possible to speak up, even when it's someone in your own family. That matters more than you might realize." For a moment, we sat in a companionable silence, the only sound the faint hum of the heater. Then Kamal added, "You've helped create a precedent. Other victims will be able to follow the path you've started." When they left, I stayed in the lounge by the window. Outside, the garden was quiet, the maple's bare branches reaching toward the pale winter sky. The frost clung to the edges of the path, and in the distance I could hear someone in the kitchen laughing over a private joke. For the first time since I walked out of my son's house, I felt something beyond the relief of escape. I had left a trail, solid enough that others could follow it. Not just an exit for myself, but a road out of silence for anyone willing to take the first step. I thought of the word Baba. It had been my reason to give without question. Later, it had been the hook for demands I could no longer meet. Now it was something else entirely, a reminder that I could still protect, still guide, but on my own terms. The road ahead for others might be long, but it was there now. And I had helped lay its first stones. It was just after lunch when the receptionist found me in the library, where I had been reading near the window. Her voice was low, but I caught the faint tension in it. "Mr. Yusuf, there's someone at the gate asking for you." 2 people, actually a man and a younger man. "They say they're your son and grandson." The words hung in the air for a moment. I closed my book slowly, marking the page, and followed her to the tall front windows. There they were. Alex stood with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his stance rigid and confrontational even from this distance. Beside him, Timon shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his jacket. They didn't speak to each other. Both kept glancing toward the door, scanning the building's facade as though they could will me to appear. The staff at the gate followed the protocol I'd made clear months ago. They stepped forward, their voices polite but steady, and said the same sentence they had said to Alec before: "Mr. Yusuf is not accepting visitors." I watched as Alec leaned toward them, speaking quickly, his hand slicing through the air in an impatient gesture. Timon looked up at the windows, perhaps searching for me, perhaps wondering if I was somewhere inside watching. But the staff did not waver. They repeated the words again, calm, unyielding. No exceptions. No change. Alec's shoulders stiffened. He turned away first, Timon following him. They didn't slam the gate or raise their voices, but the stiffness in their movements was almost louder than anger. A minute later, they were gone. I stood at the window for some time after they disappeared from sight, not because I was tempted to run after them, but because I wanted to remember this exact image: my son and grandson leaving with nothing, the door staying shut. 2 days later, the letter came. It was in a cream-colored envelope, my name written in Alex's careful, deliberate handwriting, the style he used when he wanted to seem respectful or when he needed something. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a check made out to me for $10,000. The letter was short: "Let's start over. We can put this behind us. I know we've both made mistakes. Here's a first step to show I'm serious." The check was crisp, the ink still fresh. $10,000, a sum large enough to tempt many, especially those who had lost more. But I didn't need to think long. I knew what this was. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was a purchase offer, not for forgiveness, but for access. $10,000 in exchange for the key to a door I had fought hard to close. For a moment, I thought about the earlier days, when the word Baba had been enough to make me give without question. Back then, even if he had wronged me, I would have convinced myself to give him another chance. But that man, that version of me, was gone. The door was closed now, and I intended to keep it that way. I folded the letter once, then tore it in half. I kept tearing until the pieces were small enough that no words could be read. The check followed, its neat green lines splitting under my fingers until it was nothing but scraps. I dropped them all into the waste bin and pushed the bin under my desk as though burying them. That afternoon, I carried my tea out to the garden. The air was crisp, the winter light pale but steady. The maple tree cast long shadows across the gravel path, and the sound of footsteps from other residents drifted past, a shuffle here, a cane tapping there, someone humming under their breath. I sat on a bench near the hedge, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. A robin hopped close, tilting its head at me as though curious about this quiet old man sitting alone in the sun. Somewhere, the kitchen door opened, letting out the faint clink of dishes and the smell of fresh bread. I took a slow sip of tea, tasting the faint bitterness that came when it cooled. The moment felt still, final, not because something had ended, but because I had ended it. The door would remain closed. No check, no letter, no promise would open it again. I thought of the word Baba once more. Once, it had been my reason to give endlessly. Then it had been the hook for demands I could no longer meet. Now, it was a title I carried on my own terms. I could still protect, still guide, but only those who valued my trust, not those who saw it as something to be exploited. The sun shifted, and a patch of light warmed my knee. I leaned back against the bench, the wood solid under my shoulders, the air quiet except for the bird hopping near my feet. I was free, and freedom, I realized, wasn't loud. It was this: a garden in the winter sun, a cup of tea cooling in my hands, and the certainty that the past could knock at my gate and never be let in again.